its guises.
The one golden rule of journalism and politicians is if their lips are moving, they're probably lying.
The politicians were determined to prove that they were now running the show. They rolled out their big new ideas that they hoped would win the hearts and minds of the Scottish public. But first they had to ease open the door of the closet.
When it was put forward to an astonished public, they said, "What? Eh? You're doing what?"
The Scottish public says, well, what are you on about?
They were saying, "What's this?"
The Parliament was backing the repeal of Section 28 as their showstopper. In 1988, this law was part of Mrs. Thatcher's plans to outlaw homosexuality in the classroom. For the press, it was just another balls up.
It became a scandal which ran for nearly a year and was hyped up at every opportunity by the same media organisations who had initially mugged the Scottish Parliament.
It's very easy for the muesli-eating classes to dismiss all this, but there was a massive groundswell out there who felt that Wendy Alexander and Donald Dewar really had latched onto something that really didn't concern an awful lot of people.
Immediately, the Parliament became embroiled in a battle of wills with sections of the tabloid press. The question now was, who best represented the interests of the voters? An editor of a daily newspaper or an elected government?
An editor knows his readership a lot better sometimes than politicians know their electorate. And the editor of the Daily Record knew that wouldn't go down well with the Daily Record readership.
Oh, the Deadwood stages are rolling on over the plain.
And coming into town to offer the press a hand was the stagecoach. Scotland's most famous bus driver, Brian Souter, had a fistful of dollars, and he joined forces with the record editor, the Catholic Church, and Scotland's biggest PR company to keep Section 28.
We didn't vote for it, and we're no having it.
Whip, crack away, whip, crack away, whip, crack away. So, whip, crack away, whip,
Souter stumped up £1 million to prove his point, while Cardinal Winning addressed the faithful through the columns of the popular press.
It was very depressing to see this kind of alliance between sections of the popular press in Scotland and these elements.
Once you get a cardinal and a captain of industry taking on a government, I mean, what do you expect us to do, ignore it? It was a fantastic story.
Over the next 8 months, a very ill-tempered spat raged in the columns of Scotland's newspapers.
So, whip, crack away, whip, crack away, whip, crack away. Whip, crack away, whip, crack away, whip, crack away.
I was then working for the Sunday Herald, making the point that this was a battle for the soul of Scotland. Was it going to be deeply socially conservative if people won that battle? Or was it willing to be a progressive and liberal type of Scotland?
Parliament had to respond quickly to the ferocious headlines, but our rookies were no match for the seasoned pros of the press. MSPs consulted the great and the good about what they thought of Section 28, but it all turned out a bit half-baked.
They consulted the Potato Council, yes, over Section 28 and anti-gay discrimination.
I don't know whether they gave their views back, but they were undoubtedly entitled to be consulted upon this major subject to the taddy growers of Scotland.
But the story, like the spuds, was going off the boil. After 8 months, the public were bored. The law was eventually repealed, but it had been a bloody fight that had gone the distance. Some in the press felt betrayed that day, but they had long memories, and there was always tomorrow's rematch.
It put a bit of a chill on the executive. If you didn't prepare the groundwork, there was a socially conservative voice out there that was, particularly if it got newspapers behind it, it could run a virulent, sometimes a vicious campaign, which came very close to derailing the executive.
I recall going into Donald Dewar's office, and he was sitting with reading yet another instalment in the newspapers, his head slightly in his hands, and he looked up and he said, "Brian, why are they doing this to me?"
As the Parliament was going into meltdown over Section 28, the First Minister, Donald Dewar, was desperate to find a remedy to stem the tide of bad news. Senior members of his spin team thought they'd come up with a solution, and it was just along the corridor. They turned to Alistair Campbell, New Labour's Sultan of Spin.
I know for a fact that they did ask Alistair Campbell for extra assistance in the spinning department, and he eventually got it.
Spin, the black art of getting bad news off the front pages, and the politician's way of getting journalists to print their version of the truth.
They really have, right from the start, tried to manage the media in a very aggressive way, which was something that most journalists were not particularly used to.
I mean, the trouble is politicians, they want you to print what they want you to print, but that's not the way it works. We'll print what we want to print, we will analyse what they say, and, you know, we will sort the bullshit out from the truth.
But attempts at McSpin ended in disaster. In the space of only 8 weeks, Dewar's Spin Doctor team fell apart in a series of public clangers and self-inflicted howlers. Clangor number 1, the Health Minister tried to reform the abortion laws.
The spin machine went completely out of control. It was leaked to the press by one of the First Minister's special advisors that this Health Minister had had death threats. It was a total lie, really.
Clangor number 2, one of Donald Dewar's top aides is caught in Glasgow's red light district. Twice.
I said this was a disgraceful attack on someone's character because it would ruin the prostitute's character to have been seen with a Labour spin doctor.
Clangor number 3, a third spin doctor resigns after he is caught spinning against another Labour advisor. In the midst of the political crisis, the new Parliament was robbed of its most senior politician, Donald Dewar. Would the press take stock and call a temporary truce? Would they reflect that the press bashing had got out of hand? Perhaps it was time to cut the Parliament some slack. Maybe, but not for long.